Ah, see, they really are flooding in now. Now that the clock has struck 1 o'clock, everybody is going, oh, I've got a meeting to go to.
Yeah, I think we should leave it for 2 or 3 minutes before getting started. Particularly as it's straight after lunch. You give it another minute and then maybe kick off.
Okay. David Webb is lurking. Is that David Webb of Seekout?
Yeah. We get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me do parish notices, and then those who are still joining can aren't going to miss anything very exciting, I don't think. So, good afternoon. My name is Yanto Guy. I am a vehicle safety and technology consultant with TRL. And this afternoon, we're here to present the CAMSAT tool, the Connected and Automated Mobility Safety Assurance tool. So my role this afternoon is as MC. I am not Camilla Fowler, who was intended to be the MC, but sadly she is poorly. So I will do the best I can to hold the ship afloat. So first of all, we're going to do some introductions to TRL and tell you a little bit about who TRL are and where we've come from. We're going to tell you a little bit about the project itself, which has led to the development of this tool. And then I will hand over to far more competent and capable people who will actually explain what the tool does and give a demonstration of how it works. So first of all, some housekeeping. We are fortunately all very familiar with online meetings now. So if you could ensure that you are muted, which I believe you all are. If you have any questions, if you could add them to the chat box at the top of the screen, and we may deal with them as we go along, but there's a Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we will probably deal with most of the questions. The session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, you can either sit there quietly or you can leave at this point. So, introductions. My more competent colleagues than myself are Ailey McGregor, who is a graduate researcher at TRL, Will Perrin, who is a safety and risk consultant, and Ros Walker, who is a senior safety and risk consultant. Good afternoon, Mark. So, who are TRL and what do we know? So TRL is the Transport Research Laboratory. Historically, we go back to 1933. We started life as effectively the research and development wing of the Department for Transport, and we were part of the Department for Transport up until 1996 when we were privatised. We are now a non-profit distributing research organisation working in the transport sector. So our vision is the creation of clean, efficient transport that is safe, reliable and accessible for everyone. And our mission is creating the future of transport using independent research and innovative thinking to develop sustainable solutions. We have relatively recently reviewed the structure of the organisation and looked again at our mission to understand what our strategic direction is. So I think this slide illustrates effectively where we are strategically. So on the left-hand side, we have the societal and economic drivers for change, which I think we're probably all reasonably familiar with. So environment and decarbonisation, how do we do transport in a more sustainable, a more environmentally sustainable way? Transport safety, how do we stop people being injured and killed through transport? And transport for sustainable development. How do we improve the access of lower and middle income countries to the transport systems that we benefit from in higher income countries? So those are the societal drivers that drive TRL. On the right hand side of this slide, we have the opportunities for development. And those are digitization of transport. So how do we leverage the information economy and the information revolution that's happened in the last couple of decades to improve transport, which is all about exchanging information, exchanging data and collecting data. Automation in transport, which is obviously our key theme today. How do we automate transport in order to improve the sustainability and the safety and the access to transport? And finally, new mobility, which is all of those new types of transport mode that perhaps didn't exist a few years ago. So we're thinking perhaps about things like e-scooters and micro-mobility devices, hoverboards, those kinds of things, but also things like Hyperloop and other new forms of transport, which are only now developing. TRL's experience in the automated vehicle world goes back a very long way. So back in the 1960s, we were involved in automated vehicle projects. And if any of you remember the Citroën DS that was automated back then and was seen driving around the TRL track, perhaps things have not developed as quickly as we expected them to in the 1960s. More recently, TRL has been involved in a range of projects, starting back in 2015 with Project Gateway, where we operated a number of automated pods around the Greenwich Peninsula. This was a collaborative project working with a variety of partners, including Fusion Processing and Westfield. And TRL's primary work in that project, as well as leading it, was the development of the safety case framework for that project. Since then, we've been involved in Driven and Streetwise, again concentrating on safety case development. And also Helm UK, which is a road platooning project. So taking heavy goods vehicles, platooning them together so that we have a lead vehicle which is driven by a human driver, but with then two other HGVs that follow that lead vehicle, with the headway of those vehicles being taken care of by an automated system. So TRL is the lead again in that collaborative project, and we've also done a great deal of work in that project in developing the safety case, because obviously the safety implications of taking partially automated heavy goods vehicles onto the road network are very serious. Finally, we should mention SMLL, the Smart Mobility Living Lab London. So this is effectively a department of TRL. The SMLL was set up as a collaborative project with Innovate funding and is now effectively run by TRL. SMLL is a dedicated test environment based in East London, around Greenwich, and also around the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. And effectively has been designed as a test environment on live urban roads, which have been instrumented using roadside infrastructure, so that it's possible to run an experiment, a test track type experiment on those roads and be able to monitor the behavior of vehicles, but using real world open roads. We also have a digital twin for the Smart Mobility Living Lab, so that it's possible to do experiments in which you simulate the behavior of a vehicle in a virtual environment and then go out and test it on our real world test track. So we come to Project Endeavour. Project Endeavour was a collaborative project, or is a collaborative project, which has led to the development of this tool. So the partners in this project were Oxbotica, who are the primary trialling organisation. They're the people bringing the cars, bringing the technology. We have DG Cities, who are leading on the service design and doing a lot of public engagement. We have a company called Immense, who are working on the simulation of the trials. We have Oxfordshire County Council, because they are one of the local authorities in which Project Endeavour is operating. And then TRL and the British Standards Institution, who are working on the safety assurance of those trials. The intention of Project Endeavour is to do multi-location road pilots. So historically, we have tended to do the automated vehicle trials in one specific place, one specific environment, and haven't necessarily moved around terribly much. The idea of Endeavour is that we are going to a range of different places to test automated mobility solutions. So Project Endeavour aims to create a flexible, scalable model that's going to make this process quicker and easier and more efficient. So the process of moving from one area, one local authority to another, has historically perhaps been more complicated than it needed to be, and part of the project is to make that a more fluid process, to make that an easier process. And it's also looking at the differences between different towns and cities in the UK to understand what the challenges might be in moving from one area to another, because obviously there are significant challenges when you move from, say, Milton Keynes, which is a modern purpose-built city, to perhaps Oxford, which obviously has a much more historical road network and a much more historical design to its city. Moving on. So, as part of Project Endeavour, we have developed a thing called CAMSAT, the Connected and Automated Mobility Safety Assurance Tool. The idea of CAMSAT, and Ros will go into much more detail about this shortly, but the idea of CAMSAT is to try and create a tool which is universal for all connected and automated mobility trials, so that rather than having a bespoke solution for every trial, for changing every time, we have a single tool that it's possible to use regardless of what the trial is or regardless of where you're going, so that we all speak a common language and we all have a common set of tools that we're able to use for doing safety assurance. So what's the purpose of the tool? The first one, the most obvious, is to ensure safety throughout trials and testing. Obviously, at the point of development where automated vehicles are at the moment, they are extremely sensitive to any dangers, any incidents. As we saw with the Uber crash a few years ago, the potential for an incident, particularly a fatal incident, to have a massive effect on the development of the automated vehicle world is really very significant. And any incident would undoubtedly yield worldwide coverage and very unwelcome coverage. So we need to ensure safety, because safety is a very valuable end in itself, but we also need to ensure safety because to not do so is likely to have a very wide-ranging effect on the development of automated vehicles. Our second purpose is to enable testing and development. We want to try and make that process as easy as possible while remaining safe. And the final one is to enhance public confidence. At the moment, there is a great variety in public understanding of what automated vehicles are capable of, what that means, what their implications are for safety. So we want to try and create tools that enhance public confidence in automated vehicles. The big challenges. So the first one is providing assurance to stakeholders. There are a great many stakeholders involved in automated vehicle trials who have potentially competing interests and needs, and also a varied level of understanding of the capabilities and the implications of using automated vehicles. The complexity of trials and the complexity of the vehicles undertaking those trials also varies significantly. So we see an enormous spectrum of testing and trials taking place, from things which are effectively passenger trials, where the vehicle is entirely manually driven and is perhaps carrying some payload which is mimicking being an automated vehicle, right up to very complex, fully automated vehicle trials. The next challenge is to ensure consistency in the safety case development and evaluation. Obviously, all trials and all automated vehicles are required to have a safety case, but the approach that is taken by different organizations can often be very different, and it can often be very difficult for the organizations that are developing those safety cases to understand what is required of them. The nature of those organizations is also hugely varied. So the nature of new technology development means that very often some of the companies involved with it can be very small startup companies who don't have an enormous amount of experience or an enormous amount of human resource in developing these things, right up to the very biggest international automotive OEMs, who obviously have a very different level of experience and a very different level of human and physical resource, but may not have the full understanding of the way the automated vehicle world works just yet. So the solutions to that, developing a standardized approach. So coming up with a single tool, a single approach that means it doesn't matter whether you're a little startup with 5 people or you're an international OEM, effectively you use the same tools. And it doesn't matter whether you're going to Milton Keynes or Greenwich or Oxford or wherever, you can use the same tool for your safety assurance. The second thing is to ensure that safety is proportionate to the level of risk. There is obviously the danger that through excessive safety assurance and excessive restriction, that we can unnecessarily restrict development. And obviously there is a very fine balance between ensuring safety, which is paramount, but also allowing technical development to carry on. And the final thing is to provide that insurance that we asked for, provide that assurance to stakeholders, to assure them that what is being done in their area is going to be safe and is not going to adversely affect their quality of life or their safety. So this is the existing structure of safety assurance in the connected and automated vehicle world. So at the top there, we have the DFT code of practice, which I'm sure most people are very familiar with. Well, certainly most people in the automated vehicle world are very familiar with. And this provides us with the kind of top level guidance about how trials of automated vehicles ought to be undertaken in the UK. And any of you who are familiar with this document will know that it really is very top level guidance. It points us in the right direction, but doesn't necessarily provide us with anything terribly specific about what we ought to be doing. Sitting below that is a whole set of standards that are maintained by BSI for various different elements and aspects of the system or of the trialing process. So PAS 1880 for the design of control systems, 1881 for safety cases and the design of the safety assurance of trials, 1882 for data collection, 1883 for the operational design domain taxonomy, to ensure that we all speak a common language when we are trying to describe where it is possible for an automated vehicle to operate. And 1884 for the responsibilities and the training of safety drivers. Sitting below 1881, we have the Zenzik safety case framework, which is for the test beds. I mentioned the code of practice for automated vehicle trialing. Within that document, it says trialing organizations are expected to develop a detailed safety case before conducting trials, which demonstrates that the trial activity can be conducted safely. Those planning a trial should engage with all relevant organizations with responsibility for the trial's area. Now, this has led to a level of interpretation, but I think we generally agree that this means that we engage with certainly the local authorities of the places where we're going trialing. So if we're going into a city, we talk to the city council in those areas that have their own transport administration, so transport for London or whoever, we ought to speak to that transport administration, and we also ought to be talking to the emergency services and anybody else who the trial might have an impact on. So next question, what is a safety case? So a safety case is not the same thing as a risk assessment, although a risk assessment will contribute to the development of a safety case. A safety case is a structured argument in which you make the argument that the operation that you're undertaking or the design of your vehicle, or indeed both, is safe. So that may include elements of risk assessment, but will also include things like design assessment and assessment of the way that a trial might be conducted, and a demonstration that all of those risks have been taken into consideration and the appropriate mitigations that have been put in place to ensure that what you are proposing to do as a trials organisation is appropriate and safe. Safety cases are developed by the trials organisations. So these are the people who are bringing the cars who want to go and do the test. So why is it needed, or why are safety cases needed? They promote safety during technological development. We're obviously operating in areas, the whole point of doing technology development is what we're doing is new. So there very often are not precedents to rely upon. It often isn't possible to say, well, we've always been doing this and it's always been safe, so we can carry on doing that. Very often we are doing new and different things in new and different ways, and that means we need to make a structured argument about why the things that we're doing are safe. Safety cases minimize the risks of incidents on the road. The whole point is that we're cutting down on the number of incidents that might occur. And they provide assurance for stakeholders through review and acceptance. The DFT code of practice says that you must provide an abridged version of the safety case, not a full version, but an abridged version, so that local stakeholders, people who maybe live in the area or the local authorities or the emergency services or whoever, can develop an understanding of what is being done in their area, and they can see how safety is being made central to that work. So the roles and interactions, the safety case creator is the trialing organisation, although that doesn't necessarily mean that it is only the trialing organisation that is involved in the preparation of that safety case. That they may come to organisations like TRL for support in the development of those safety cases. Stakeholder engagement, so the safety case will be shown to insurers, local and road authorities, and the test beds or the landowners where the trial is taking place. And this slide is supposed to indicate that actually that is a circular process, that there is some exchange of information that goes both ways. So those organisations who are being consulted may also provide some support and some information and some stipulations to the people who are preparing that safety case. So this slide demonstrates the roles that the various stakeholders might have. So the insurers are obviously the people who are financially, at least, overseeing the trial and who are financially responsible ultimately for anything that might go wrong. The insurance industry is very much based on historical precedent. So, the insurance industry has built up very substantial databases of who has accidents, what type of cars they're driving, the circumstances, their mileage, all of those kinds of things. So that when you go to get your car insurance, they look you up on a table and say, "All right, well, you're 40 years old and you drive this type of car in this area, so your level of risk is this." Now, of course, for automated vehicles, it isn't possible to do that yet because we don't have that body of evidence yet, because there are so few of them in operation. So the safety case supplants a lot of that historical information so that it's possible to make a reasoned judgment about the level of risk that the insurance company is accepting. The roads and the local authorities don't necessarily have any legal responsibility for reviewing safety cases, but they are key stakeholders in the sense that if a trial is being conducted on a road network that they are responsible for, or a road network that is in their local area, then clearly they have an interest in that activity and may have safety concerns and things like that about what is being done. So the primary driver for roads and local authorities is to understand how safety is being managed and to understand the impact of that activity on anybody else who might be using that road network. The test beds and the landowners will be seeking assurance that what is being done is safe, that it's not going to have any effect on any of the other activities that may be taking place in their test bed or on their land. And to understand what level of control is being exercised and what level of control they need to exercise over the safety of that trial. This is a simplification of the safety assurance engagement. So the stakeholders we've seen, the insurers, the local authorities, the test beds and the landowners. The options. The first one is independent technical review. So you might, as one of those stakeholders, decide that you want to do your own review of the safety case to understand how that safety case has been prepared and understand the implications of it. You might just do some higher level due diligence to assure yourself that a safety case has been prepared by somebody else, but you might not want to pull that safety case apart and do a very in-depth assessment of the way it's been made. The challenge, successfully reviewing and preparing safety cases is technically extremely challenging, and we are working in an area that is very new and very cutting edge, which means that actually there isn't enormous bodies of evidence. The level of technical knowledge necessary to be able to make a good judgment is extremely high. So it can be very difficult for some of those stakeholders to fully engage with this process. That, of course, implies that there is a cost to conducting that review, and a review of a safety case may be a process that can go on for many months. TRL have been involved with safety case reviews for a number of projects, and that isn't half a day of reading through the paperwork. That can be a very long process that goes on for many months of negotiating with the people who've prepared the safety case, with talking through their reasoning, with getting hold of documents, and it can be extremely complex. There is always concern about liability, that if you have reviewed somebody's safety case, do you then take on the liability for that safety case? There is the problem that there's effectively no standard approval process. So you're not necessarily working against a set of standards, although obviously we mentioned that standards exist for certain things, but you're not necessarily, it's not necessarily a tick box exercise. There is a level of judgment involved. It is very difficult to enable a transition between different locations. So if a local authority conducts a review and then a trials organisation wants to go to the local authority next door, it is very difficult to take the approval that you may have gained from one local authority to the one next door, because they may have a different level of expectation, a different level of expertise, a different level of experience, and so on. And the final thing is that the accessibility of safety cases often is very difficult, and that may be because of technical reasons. It's very, a safety case can be an extremely large document. Very often there is information within the safety case that is commercially extremely sensitive, so trials organisations may not be over keen to share it with too many people, so the accessibility of those documents can be difficult. So the solution, and this is where CAMSAT comes in, is to develop a cost-effective review tool. Hang on, let me get that back to, there we go. So the solution is to develop a cost-effective review tool that ensures compliance with the code of practice and the supporting standards, provides a consistent and simple approach, whoever is using it, which is where the project endeavour and the development of the CAMSAT tool comes in. Ros has popped up. I will pass over to Ros to explaining a great deal more detail how CAMSAT actually works.
Thank you. I'm struggling to move to the next slide, so I might have to get you to steer for me. It hasn't worked.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Are you moving it on? Yeah, perfect. As mentioned in Ianta's introductions, Project Endeavour has a work stream dedicated to safety assurance. So this slide outlines some of the objectives within that work stream. So firstly, as I've already been kind of outlined, we wanted to kind of promote a consistent approach to safety assurance and reduce kind of the complexity involved. And this is very much to support pop-up autonomy. So the idea that we need to be able to move between one trial location to another with relative ease. A second kind of objective is around improving the understanding and capability to both demonstrate and assess the safety of CAV trials. So with those objectives in mind, we've developed a couple of key materials tools to support the safety assurance of CAV trials. Next slide, please. So when we kind of kicked off the work stream, we decided to undertake some stakeholder engagement to first better identify the needs of stakeholders in terms of safety assurance of CAV trials, and secondly, to then develop appropriate solutions to meet those needs. So we engage with a variety of different stakeholders, including trialling organisations, road and local authorities, test beds and landowners, and insurance bodies. And the next few slides just outline some of the key findings from that engagement, which kind of provides context for what we've developed. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines some of the key findings from the engagement with trialling organisations. So one thing that came out was that there was a lack of understanding. So when trialling organisations were engaging with different stakeholders around safety cases and safety assurance, they were finding that people didn't really understand what they were having to review. So a lot of work and time and effort was put into kind of the education piece around what a safety case is and what safety assurance was, before a stakeholder could then go and kind of review the information and come back with some questions. So from a trialling organisation perspective, that was quite a labour intensive activity. Secondly, the feedback was that there was no uniformity in requirements for safety assurance. So one stakeholder might require information in one format, whereas another stakeholder would want something else, and they were constantly having to reinvent the wheel in terms of what they were producing in terms of safety information. And of course, that then impacts on their ability to achieve this pop-up autonomy. Another interesting finding was that trialling organisations said that because some test beds or local authorities were requiring a lot more information than others, there is the kind of temptation for them to then choose particular test beds or local authority areas where, you know, it's easier for them to kind of relay the information and get the safety assurance signed off. So if you are somebody who's wanting to encourage kind of testing within your area, then it's obviously key for you to avoid having too much of a burdensome process. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of road and local authorities, the first finding was around that there was a real variation in experience of CAV trialling. So as mentioned, Oxfordshire County Council is part of the Endeavour Consortium, and they've had a lot of experience with CAV trialling previously, having a number of different trials take place in the last few years, whereas other local authorities perhaps haven't done anything on CAV or very limited amounts on CAV. So kind of the experience with local authorities does vary significantly. Secondly, that there was a real inconsistency in approach taken to the safety assurance of trials. So for those that had already had CAV trials, some outlined that they would review the safety case themselves because they had internal capability. Others would be relying on external independent safety case validations, such as TRL and many others. And then others were kind of only doing a light touch kind of review of safety assurance, perhaps through some key questions that they had established themselves. And the kind of last thing that's already been touched upon is that local authorities are very keen to ensure that, you know, CAVs are safe in their area for the perspective of, you know, duty of care for road users and road safety. But they are keen also to avoid effectively signing off trials and taking on any liability for trials. And that was kind of a really strong finding that came through. Next slide, please. So kind of similar findings for the insurers and insurance bodies. Again, there was a big variation in experience of CAV trialling. So, you know, some had no interest whatsoever in getting involved in CAV trials. Others had maybe interest, but just started the journey. And then there's some that had quite a lot of experience with CAV trialling and had got into the nitty-gritty previously in safety assurance and safety case reviews. And for those that have had experience, they have developed extensive knowledge and expertise internally to be able to properly kind of review the safety and risk of trials. Similar to local authorities, there is inconsistencies in the process for assessing trials and risk. So whilst there was similarities, there was many kind of key differences in their approach. And I think the insurers are a stakeholder that do want to get into the nitty-gritty of safety cases and spend time really getting into the detail of the risk assessments, etc. Because obviously, effectively, they are ensuring the risk of the trial. However, they don't necessarily have an in-depth understanding across the piece of all the different standards. So they did have an interest in having some kind of high-level checklist to ensure that the safety case was aligning to all elements of standards that exist out there. Next slide. So last stakeholders we engaged was the test beds and the landowners. Again, variation in experience of trials. Some test beds have, you know, many trials already happened. Others are kind of still working towards the process of accommodating CAVs. No standardisation in the process for safety assurance. So the mature test beds have their own risk assessment processes set up. New ones are in the process of developing those. However, there was no consistency due to a lack of specific tool in place. Again, interested in the high-level checklist, their kind of view is that the standards are often, you know, new standards are coming out all the time and things are changing. So they would appreciate some kind of checklist to ensure that they are keeping abreast of new standards as they're coming to market. And again, like the local authorities and road authorities, they also stressed that they didn't take on liability of trials, and that remained in, you know, the camp of the trialling organisation. Next slide, please. Just some generic kind of findings from the stakeholder engagement. One was that, you know, all stakeholders found it difficult to keep up to date. So we've kind of alluded to this, but there's obviously lots of changes in the CAV landscape, which is difficult and time consuming to keep on top of. So they all would kind of express that as a challenge. Another thing that was a challenge was that at the moment there's no really kind of way of sharing knowledge between trials. So whilst any major incident would obviously be recorded, there's no kind of way of recording near misses or, you know, even best practice things that that you would potentially want to share between one trial and another, one test bed and another, one local authority area to another. So there's kind of an interest in that kind of knowledge sharing, best practice type of thing. We also discussed a number of different ideas with different stakeholder groups to get their feedback, and that has obviously helped to inform the outputs of this work package. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So within the safety assurance work package, TRL has delivered a couple of key outputs. One are stakeholder specific guidance documents. So these are specifically aimed at one particular stakeholder groups. At the moment, there's lots of different guidance out there, but it's a bit broader. So this kind of drills down into a particular type of stakeholder. And these documents are aimed at addressing some of the gaps in knowledge that was identified within the stakeholder engagement. So we produced 3 different documents. One is for trialling organisations, one is for local authorities, and one is for insurers. We decided that the test beds, because they've got the ZENSIC safety case framework, it wasn't really worth as kind of muddy in the water with another guidance document for them. So we just stuck with the 3. And we'll be sending out the guidance documents in an email, I think, next week following the webinar, so you can have a look at them. So specifically for local authorities, the contents of the guidance is: what is safety assurance and what are the requirements for local authorities? How can local authorities facilitate safe CAV trials? The trial safety review process, and then also includes best practice case studies, including Oxfordshire County Council, which is obviously part of the Endeavour consortium. Next slide, please. So in addition to the guidance, we've also created the new online software called CAMSAT, which is the Connected and Automated Mobility Safety Assurance Tool. And obviously that's largely the focus of today's session. So the aim of CAMSAT is to facilitate a fast and efficient trial safety review process that allows safety to be assured to stakeholders whilst addressing the key challenges that we've identified in the stakeholder engagement. So I'll pass you now to Will, who will provide an overview of the tool and we'll run through the demo.
Hi everyone. Is that okay? So yeah, Yanto, if you could just control the slides for me, that would be great. So just as a bit of context, my name's Will Perrin and I've a safety and risk consultant for TRL, and I've been working on this sort of CAMSAT concept for many months now. So I'm really excited to have a demo that I can show you guys today. But just before that, I'm just going to take you through what is CAMSAT and how does it work. So CAMSAT has really been developed to support the exchange of safety assurance information between a trialling organisation and any stakeholders that have been involved in or will be involved in the CAM trials. So the CAMSAT tool is open to 2 main different types of user who will have different levels of access. So that'll be the reviewer and the trialling organisation. So the tool is really based around asking the trialling organisation to complete a questionnaire that contains high-level questions on safety. And these high-level questions have been designed to ensure compliance with relevant regulations, standards, and good practice. So things like the Code of Practice, BSI, PAS standards, etc. And so when that information is provided by the trialling organisation, the tool then automatically feeds those answers back to the reviewer for comment. So allowing that 2-way exchange of information that we know is happening and keeping all of that information into one easily accessible case file. So it's really a simple approach that we hope will aim to streamline safety assurance for CAV trials and address the key challenges that we found during stakeholder engagement. And we aim really for this tool to be usable for all different types of reviewing stakeholders. So that includes local authorities, road authorities, landowners, and test beds. Next slide, please. So the next few slides will take us through some of the key challenges that were raised with the stakeholder engagement, which Ros and Yanto have mentioned previously, and just outline how the tool helps to address those. So in terms of the first challenges, obviously the reviewers will need to be assured that a trial is being conducted safely as part of their own responsibilities in their area. But it's obviously important that the reviewers are not accepting responsibility for safety by doing that sort of detailed technical review or doing a sign-off approval process. Otherwise, as we've mentioned, they could be liable in the event that something goes wrong. So obviously there needs to be a balance between safety assurance and liability. And the real benefit of the CAMSAT tool using this sort of self-declaration style approach, using this questionnaire, means that stakeholders don't have to undertake that technical review of the safety case, and so this really sits the liability with the trialling organisation as it sort of should be in terms of local authorities and other stakeholder groups. Next slide, please. So also, aside from the liability issues, that doing detailed reviews can be significantly time and resource intensive. And obviously the CAMSAT tool then simplifies that to just a review of the trialling organisation's answers to that questionnaire in line with already established best practice. As well as that, the tool also allows parties to track the exchange of information and guide both parties through the workflow. So that should really streamline the review of safety information and hopefully prevent those activities from extending for many months and potentially delaying trials. Next slide, please. So one of the key benefits of the tool is that the self-declaration questionnaires can essentially be very easily configured and updated at any time. So this means that specific bespoke questions can be developed to address specific stakeholder requirements. So, for example, in London, the TfL have a requirement for operating a passenger service, and they have license requirements for that. So for trials operating in London and authorities operating in London that want to ensure compliance with those requirements as well, the questionnaire can be configured to incorporate those requirements. And this flexibility also means that if new standards or regulations do come out or old ones are updated, then the questionnaire can be immediately updated to meet those new requirements and keep the safety assurance up to date with emerging best practice. Next slide, please. So as Janto mentioned earlier, one of the key issues with trialling organisations and sharing safety assurance information is that it often contains commercially sensitive material, which they're unwilling, rightly so, to share. And so that is often a key difficulty with detailed safety case reviews and safety assessments, is that that kind of information is in those kind of assessments. So, with CAMSAT focusing on the high level questions, it's only focused on declaration and compliance against standards and best practice. And so as a result, the commercially sensitive information doesn't have to be provided. But on top of that, CAMSAT is part of the established IMAP software family, which regularly handles sensitive collision data. So any information that is provided is still stored securely within the IMAP module and only accessible by the reviewer and the trialling organisation. Next slide, please. And just as the final sort of challenge we've noted is that maintaining an audit trail for safety assurance and engagement with stakeholders can be often quite difficult, as it's mainly done via email. With CAMSAT, the entire workflow is completely automated and the records of all the information exchange is kept securely in one place. So that's really useful for supporting decision makers to collate all their evidence that they've used to base their decisions. And it can also be used to recall safety assurance information when needed. So that's all of the sort of summary of the CAMSAT tool. I just want to highlight some key points. So obviously, the whole development of this tool has been focused on and based on the stakeholder engagement that we've done during endeavour. So hopefully that should be fairly reflective of what people want already and should help resolve those problems that we know the stakeholders involved in trials have. This format and approach, the sort of self-declaration approach, is based off of what testbeds are already doing. And this is something that SMLL is an approach that is already being used. So we know it's already a well understood approach that is useful, and we hope to just expand that to other stakeholders that might want to use it. One of the sort of key benefits that we hope to realise from CAMSAT is that it should reduce the burden on trialling organisations to do this style of engagement, and so should hopefully encourage better safety communication all round. And another benefit is that it should enable better interoperability between areas, because we're all working from the same tool, have the consistent requirements and a consistent approach to safety is being adopted across the UK. So hopefully that should start to reduce barriers to testing, encourage testing in various parts of the UK, and also movement between the UK for trials and testing. And then sort of looking forward, at the moment, there isn't an approval scheme in place for automated vehicles. and as a result, it's not simple to communicate safety of a vehicle to all different types of stakeholders with various level of experience. And what we're doing is not necessarily to replace an approval scheme that will come out in the future, but hopefully bridge the gap to ensure that safety is being maintained and communicated before that approval scheme is implemented. Sorry, next slide, please. I forgot to say next slide, and you got stuck on the other one. So going back, so if you could go to the next slide again to sort of next steps of the CAMSAT tool. So in terms of the next steps, currently we're in the we've got a pilot tool developed, and this is basically a concept that we're hoping to identify some pilot trials to test out the tool over the summer and explore the possibility of using that and getting the feedback on how usable it is in practice. So we're exploring using the tool for the Greenwich trials, so the endeavour Greenwich trials in August, and also keen to look at other CAV trials outside of endeavour. So if you are aware of a trial that is happening in your area and you are interested in piloting the tool, then please get in contact with us at the end of the session or after, and let us know, and we can start that conversation. As part of the further next steps, we're also looking to define how the tool can be best implemented. So currently we have the tool and we've got it working in a specific way, but we want to understand, how that in practice, who would host the tool, how it would be funded across the various different stakeholders, and what the roles and responsibilities there. So we've got a couple of polls at the end of the session to get some feedback on that. And there's very high level questions, but we'll also be sending out some more detailed questionnaires. So if you do have an opinion on that and you are interested, then please fill those out and send them back to us. Looking forward, there are also some potential future enhancements of the tool that, should we get funding to develop, we would look to improve on. So these are based on the findings from our engagement with industry. So there are further common issues that are identified across the groups that we could then include into a solution into the tool. So one of those enhancements would be the generation of a centralized database for recording incidents and near misses, as well as any other sort of outcomes and learnings, lessons learned from trials. And the intent there is to hopefully share that those outputs and lessons across the sort of CAM testing ecosystem across the industry, so that we can really start to learn from those lessons across the UK and start to improve safety assurance overall. And another sort of key enhancement that we're looking at is a method of keeping stakeholders up to date in terms of relevant safety assurance information, and how the CAM industry landscape is showing, and what are their ever evolving requirements and responsibilities. So something like a newsfeed to provide relevant updates, complemented with a database that contains lists of relevant regulations, standards, guidelines in an easily accessible and hierarchical way, so that they can understand exactly what their responsibilities are in various elements of the regulations and standards and so on. So that's next slide, please, Yanto. So that's essentially a brief overview of the tool. I'm now going to just sort of give you a quick demo. So Yanto, if you mind dropping your screen very quickly, and I will bring mine up. Thank you. Get there in the end. There we go. So shout if you can't see my screen, but this is
got it.
Brilliant. Okay, so you can see now I'm logged into the IMAP tool, and I mentioned before that there are two main roles within the tool. So that would be the reviewers and the trialing organisation, but there is a third role called the product owner. And currently I'm signed in as a product owner. So what the product owner has is two key responsibilities. So the first one is the organizational management, which is essentially just adding organizations such as a local authority who wants to use the tool, just adding them to give them access to the tool. But also their sort of key responsibility is generation of questionnaires, so creation, management of the questionnaires. So currently you can see there, this is what it would look like. I've created a number of sort of demo questionnaires there, and currently only the product owner can create and edit questionnaires. We've done that intentionally, so the aim of that is to create standard questionnaires for different types of users. So this is so we can, different types of user groups, so for example, keeping consistency across all local authorities that have access to the tool. So the aim is there to really keep consistency of the questions and the level of detail that is being asked across the different reviewers in the UK. So it's a lot more easier to transfer between different areas. If there are additional sort of individual requirements, however, we can create bespoke questions if needed. As I mentioned before, sort of in terms of London requirements, there's other requirements for the TfL, so we can include those individually. But the benefit of having it done in this way is obviously that the reviewers won't have to update their questionnaires personally in line with sort of best practice. The product owner can do that for everyone automatically. So once a questionnaire is assigned, is created, it can then be assigned to a reviewer. So I can do that simply by going to organisation management. You can see these would be all of the reviewing organisations that have access to the tool. These are just demos. But if I wanted to assign a questionnaire, I could then assign a questionnaire here, select all of the relevant ones, and then hit save. And then the reviewer will then have access to all those different questionnaires. So reviewers, the reason we've done it this way is that reviewers might want multiple questionnaires to cover different types of trial. So for example, a questionnaire might be specifically used for automated driving. One might be used for a remotely operated vehicle, which might have different safety requirements and safety information that's shared. And it could even be extended to other types of mobility technologies. So it could be new mobility solutions, or it could trials, or it could be sort of automated passenger robots that use the pavements is an example that I've come across that this could be used for. So it should be fairly flexible, and we can develop a questionnaire that is essentially applicable to the requirements of those different types of trials, and then those can be shared. So I can now move on to a reviewer login. So this is what the reviewer will see. So once they have access to the tool, they can simply log in, and there'll be an admin on their account, and they can sort of manage their own organization. So in terms of organization management, this is simply just adding users within their own organization to have access to the tool. And I believe there's something like 300 available users per organization. So it's practically an unlimited amount of users you can have for the tool per organization. And to simply do that, you just have to hit add user, and that'll bring up just basic information that you need to supply them with, including an email address, and then that person will have access to the software. So that's the sort of initial thing that you can be doing as a reviewer, but obviously their main responsibility will be to invite trialing organizations to fill out a questionnaire and then review the responses. So firstly, to do that, you can go to the sort of trialing organization management screen, and this will supply a list of all of the trialing organizations that you have contact with. So if you, as a local authority, for example, are approached by a trialing organization that wants to test in your area, you can simply add their contact details by hitting add trial designer, and similarly just add the relevant contact details. And then they'll be logged into the system, and you can then start to invite them to take a questionnaire. So to invite someone to take a questionnaire, you simply just select them and invite trial designer, select the most appropriate questionnaire, and then hit send. And when you hit send, that will then generate an email that is sent to the trialing organization contact, which will then invite them to take the questionnaire. So the trialing organisation won't need to set up an account. They can access the questionnaire via a web page, provide all the responses that they require, and then send that information back to the reviewer, all in that web page. They'll also receive email notifications whenever there's any updates with their questionnaire. So that's what a reviewer will mainly see in terms of inviting questionnaires. I'll then just jump back to the questionnaire itself. So this is in essence what the questionnaire will look like. This is from a reviewer's perspective, but the trialing organisation will see something very similar. And this is a demo questionnaire. Obviously, the questions here are examples just to give you a flavour of what might be asked and how they're formatted. But essentially, the questions are primarily yes or no questions aimed at declaring compliance with the relevant clauses and of standards and regulations and best practice. So the trialing organisation can declare compliance with their various elements. However, if there is specific elements of information that does need to be provided, for example, the trial route or what dates of the trial needs to be added, etc., that can be added by text, and you can also attach files if needed for additional evidence. So you can see that these are just examples of various questions. And you can see in this question, it says, as an example, will the safety driver be sat in the vehicle during trialing? Correct answer, yes. Now, this is a feature for the reviewers that for each of the questions, we can highlight whether the preferred answer has been given or not. So this is not necessarily the correct answer, as the sort of the code of practice. You can still have a safety driver outside of the vehicle for remote operation, but it just raises more safety concerns, and there's potentially more level of evidence that needs to be provided for when the safety driver is not in the vehicle. So this should hopefully highlight whether they need to start asking any additional questions about this to be assured of safety during their review. And if they do want to raise any questions, they can simply do that by opening a comment. And you can see there I've added a comment: how will control be maintained without safety driver? So hopefully this function is useful for reviewers to better understand whether the right answers are being given and when to ask for further information, and provide those comments as and when they need to. So once those comments have been provided and the review is complete, they can either submit those comments back to the trialing organisation, and then once submitted, that trialing organisation will receive another email asking them to address any comments, provide any more information, and that allows that sort of two-way exchange of information, but keeps it all in one file where it's most relevant and easily accessible. And so after however many rounds that is needed to sort of address those comments, and both parties are happy with the information provided, then the review can be completed. The trialing organisation, simply the reviewer has to hit trialing complete review, add a final comment, and then hit confirm. And then when the review is complete, the trialing organisation will be notified that it's complete, and then the file is then closed. And the aim is that sort of concludes all the safety assurance activity that is needed to be done. So essentially the whole process should be is logged in this easily accessible case file that should be simple and efficient to be filled out and reviewed for all parties. So that was a very quick demo on how the tool works. Hopefully that you can see that it would be quite useful tool and should really help streamline the safety assurance process. But if you do have any questions or anything about that, then please get in touch or put something in the chat, and we can address those later. So I'm now going to pass over control back to Roz.
Could you get the presentation back up?
Yeah,
I have to make it so. I think in order to hear the sound bites, you might need to do it in a certain mode. Maybe
yeah. Okay, do you want me to play, Graham?
Just 1 second. So yeah, now you've got a good understanding of the tool and the challenge that's trying to address. We thought we'd show you a couple of sound bites from to hear perspectives from relevant industry stakeholders who we started to engage with on the tool. So the first is Graham Taylor, who is head of deployment at Oxbotica. So obviously Oxbotica is part of the endeavour consortium, as mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's the first sound bite. You should play outside of presentation mode.
Hello, my name is Graham Smith, and I'm the Programme Director of Project Endeavour. Today I wanted to talk about the importance of safety assurance. So as part of Project Endeavour, Oxbotica has added our software to a small fleet of 6 vehicles, which we're using to demonstrate autonomy in places like Oxford, Birmingham, and London. One of the key imperatives for us as we start to deploy autonomous vehicles into public environments is to be able to ensure the safety of pedestrians, other drivers, and our staff. Safety is ultra important to us, and it's an integral part of the culture here at Oxbotica. Being able to provide assurances on safety is also really important to the various other organisations we work with, both inside our consortium and outside. However, the safety story is very detailed and it can get confusing. The story starts in very early stages in the design of our software, the implementation of that software into vehicles, the training of our staff that supervise the autonomous vehicles. The safety case also covers things like risk assessment of the routes that we run on, the weather conditions we experience, and also consideration of exactly where and when we'll be operating, both in private and in public environments. Now, whenever we visit a new city to prepare for an autonomous trial or a demonstration, we always find a lot of interest from local authorities and emergency services, but often there's a lot of confusion about what levels of approval are required. And some stakeholders, quite understandably, find it very difficult to stay up to date with the most relevant standards and guidance. So we recognise that stakeholders need to receive adequate assurance that any trial taking place in their area is being conducted safely. And additionally, we find out that local authorities want to avoid taking on liability for those trials, and what they really need is clarity and confirmation that the responsibility for ensuring safety during those field trials remains with trialling organisations like Oxbotica. Now, in Project Endeavour, TRL has engaged with a wide range of our stakeholders, both again inside the consortium and outside, and that's included local authorities, road authorities, emergency services and insurers. And the aim of TRL's engagement has been to explore what sort of tool, what sort of information stakeholders would need in order to support a more consistent approach to safety assurance, wherever we go. So I'm really pleased now to see that TRL are able to demonstrate the software tool they've been developing for trial safety assurance. As a leader of the Endeavour Consortium, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it works in real life and getting your feedback.
Fantastic. Next slide, please.
Hello.
So next we're going to hear from Oliver Howes, who's a senior technical consultant within the SML testbed in Greenwich. Obviously, they host a number of CAD trials too.
Hi, I'm Oliver Howes, and I'm a senior technical consultant for the Smart Mobility Living Lab, which is a TRL company. The Smart Mobility Living Lab, or SML for short, is an urban test facility created to accelerate the creation and development of new mobility technology and solutions.
He's freezing on us.
Much of our work involves supporting customers run many different types of trials on public roads at our 2 instrumented sites in East London, one in Stratford and one in Woolwich in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Testing and validation of technology in a public environment is going to play a key role in the success of new mobility technologies. However, to ensure progressive development of such technologies, safety must be carefully considered. SML have a responsibility for the safety of trials taking place in the London CAN testbed, and therefore, as part of our trial deployment process, we conduct a review of all trial safety cases. These reviews must be appropriate for the trial being conducted. For example, if a manually driven trial is planned, SML acknowledges that the amount of information required within a safety case is far reduced when compared to an automated vehicle trial involving members of the public. Defining a suitable level of information and detail can sometimes be difficult. The creation and review of a trial safety case needs to be a smooth process, one which is not just a box-ticking exercise, and also one which doesn't create barriers to testing. Using an online collaborative platform to facilitate this safety case review would really help with this. When conducting public trials, the information required by local stakeholders can sometimes be a little unclear. At SMLL, we aim to make this process better understood by our customers, the testing organisations, and a collaborative tool to assist with this would be of great benefit. SMLL also acknowledges that there's potentially a lot of commercially sensitive information in and around a trial safety case. Therefore, sharing the correct and relevant information to satisfy local stakeholders is key. The tool that TRL have been developing in consultation with stakeholders, including test facilities such as SMLL, local authorities and testing organisations, sounds an interesting and important tool in overcoming these barriers, and I look forward to seeing the initial demonstration.
Next slide, please. So obviously you've heard from us and some of the industry stakeholders about the tool. So what we wanted to do was do some feedback polls to hear what you think. Unfortunately, we've lost a few people along the way, probably to other meetings. So it's just have to capture whoever's here. So I'm just going to launch these now. So I've got a couple of questions. The first is around how useful you think the CAMSAT tool is, and second is around who you think should fund the tool. Hopefully, you should all see this coming now. So how useful do you think the CAMSAT tool will be in driving consistency and streamline the safety assurance of CAM trials? If you could vote, that would be really appreciated. Okay, we've got 6 votes so far. Any others?
Do you want TRL people to vote or not, Ros?
Probably not.
Okay.
8 votes. Okay, that's probably, I know a lot of people have left. And the second one is, who do you think should fund the hosting of the tool? Trialing organisations, reviewers of safety assurance, or central bodies, or a central body? So if you could submit your answers now. We've only got 2 votes at the moment. 5, 6. 7. So can you guys see the results of the poll or not?
Yeah, they're updating in the little box.
Okay, so you can see them. Perfect. Okay, that's really useful information for us. So in terms of the first one, we've got a mixture of results, but majority said that the tool was somewhat useful, which is positive to hear. And then in terms of who should fund the tool, again, we've got a mixture of results, but the majority, 57%, said a central body, 29% said the reviewers of safety assurance, and 14% trying organisations. So that's quite interesting findings. So thank you very much for that. Next slide, please. So that leads us to the end of the formal presentation of the session. So just a quick plea again that if you've got any trials happening in the summer, then we'd be really keen to hear from you. The demo of the tool will be free of charge, of course, and we're just really keen to get as many people trialing the tool and helping feedback on the usability of the tool so that we can essentially refine it for the future. So we'd be, I think there was a comment in the chat already from somebody who's left, but we'd welcome any feedback that you've got in the next few minutes to help us get the tool ready for implementation. Also, let us know of any questions and we can try our best to answer them. So I think, Ailey, you're going to be managing the Q&A.
Yeah.
We've got a hand up.
Okay. So there's a comment from somebody. Are they going to include trials on motorways at some point in the future?
Yeah, so apologies, it should have been local authorities and road authorities in terms of the audiences of the tool. So yes, all road authorities such as Highway in England and you know, TfL, etc. You know, they could quite easily use the tool. Obviously, Highways England have their own risk assessment process, GG 104, and that would obviously still remain because that's the process that they have in place. So the tool would be an add-on to their existing GG 104 process, but certainly they would be potential users of the tool, as also for local roads as well.
There's a hand up from Mark. If you want to come off mute, you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. This is a question for Rosalind. At one point, you shared a slide with stakeholder guidance documentation, and there's 3 documents coming out well, soon.
Yeah.
And which of the 3 could cover information for landowners?
Yeah, so there's so we didn't actually in the end develop one for well, we've kind of badged as test beds and landowners because there's the Zenzik safety case framework that's already established. So that would probably be a good resource which we can include in the email to promote next week as well. If you haven't already seen it, I'm not sure if you have. Otherwise, there may be kind of relevant bits within the local authorities one as well. Out of the 3 that we've created, the local authorities is probably the best fit for landowners, but we've kind of badged landowners and test beds in kind of the bracket and decided not to develop a specific guidance document for that audience. So we'll put an action so that when we send it out next week, we also send a link to the Zenzik guidance as well. Quite useful.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any more questions or feedback?
I have another question. Sorry.
Yeah.
I need to lower my hand as well, but I do have another question, sorry. Yeah, I was wondering, so you've liaised and worked together extensively with Oxfordshire County Council, and I was wondering, have they also used the CAMSAT tool already, or and have you seen their questionnaire that is on their website?
Yeah. Will, I think you're probably best placed to answer this one, if you can.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll just open. Yeah, so they obviously haven't had a chance to use the tool directly yet, just because of the development timeline in the way that we've developed it in parallel with other endeavour activities. They haven't had time to use it within the endeavour trials that they've been doing, but we've engaged with them heavily, and we have obviously. We've been involved in the development of that questionnaire with Oxfordshire County Council. So what we really wanted to do is part of endeavour is complete that sort of process, bring that sort of manual questionnaire onto an online format that starts to be considered sort of best practice for all local authorities. So it's something that we could bring into the CAMSAT tool as a questionnaire. And start to use that more widely outside of Oxfordshire, and hopefully that becomes sort of a good standard approach. But also the benefit of the tool allows us to easily configure those questionnaires on the fly, as it were, and keep those updated in response to emerging best practice.
Yeah, as I was going to say, the endeavour, we've still got to go to Greenwich in August, so we're definitely keen to kind of have that closed loop thing by using the CAMSAT tool to test it out in the Greenwich trials. But of course, the Oxfordshire County Council trials were the first of the 3 different locations that we went to in endeavour, so we didn't get the chance to do it. The tool itself was only kind of formally launched on the 7th of June But yeah, certainly Oxfordshire County Council will be keen to look at other trials that they're running elsewhere and see if they can use the tool to try it out. But it's very much aligned with the process that we've created or helped create with Oxfordshire County Council in terms of what they've got in place on their website. Any other questions, comments, feedback? No? Well, if there's no other questions, then I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming today. I hope you found the session really useful. We really would like to hear from you if you're interested in talking a little bit more about the tool or anything else that we've talked about today. We'll be sending out an email early next week with a recording of the webinar, links to the guidance documents and also Zemzic guidance documents, a link to Smart Survey, which we would really appreciate your time. It shouldn't take too long, it's quite high level, to provide some further details to help us to further refine the tool. So if you do get the chance, that'd be really appreciated. And if you want to get in touch, then there's our contact and details on the slide. But thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks, folks. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.